Hey there fellow gamers, today I'm going to take you on a journey through my recent Gamejam adventure. On this trip I team up with my good friend Sniffelwith and venture into the heart of Latvia to create games in a medieval castle. So buckle up and let's dive into it. It all began when Coherence offered me the opportunity to fly all the way to Latvia to make games in a castle in the middle of nowhere. So of course I said no. Yes! We gathered our gear and picked up Chiro, an awesome Coherence employee, on the way to the airport. After landing at Riga airport we went to pick up our rental car. But here's where things took a turn. Can you believe that car rental companies wouldn't let us have the car if we were just 1 hour late for our booking? We had already paid for a whole week and they rented it to someone else. We needed the car where we were going and ended up spending 1 to 2 hours figuring out an alternative. Our first night's accommodation wasn't actually at the castle itself, but rather a cozy little hut nestled 20 minutes away on a deserted dirt road. And when I say deserted, I really mean it. The journey to and from the castle was an adventure in itself, with only occasional encounters with the local folk. The following day we finally arrived at the castle. Despite its size, the castle had a charmingly rustic vibe, with a grand hall, a court, a tavern and a stunning natural surroundings, complete with picturesque lake and woods. Now let's dive into the heart of the adventure, the game jam. The theme for the jam was quick and dirty, and Sniffelwith and I teamed up to think of an idea for this. We had a really hard time coming up with anything that would work for multiplayer, and we even ended up going for a bit of a walk. On this walk we came up with the idea of a classic slippery sumo game, but with Super Smash Bros. Like elements as for the damage, scaling and abilities to attack. So we started working on this. Rather early in the process we got some assets for the game to look good, and then we started working on the basic movement, the level and the base of the Coherence networking. With this we were very quickly able to get set up and running with something playable. Now at this point it's far from good or fun, but it is impressive to have a playable multiplayer game on a server running in about 1 to 2 hours. The level is set on this desert type terrain to stick to the quick and dirty theme. I also used the cozy asset to add some atmosphere, and I think it came out looking pretty good rather quickly. Of course there was still a lot of tweaking to be done to the level and movement, but we moved on for now. I started working on the abilities and Sniffelwith started working on the UI. As for the abilities, the first one added was the ground slam. We really wanted fun but still impactful feeling abilities, so rather early on I started working on polishing the ground slam with some impact particles and movement particles, and this was the end of day 1. Not the most productive work, but we still got a good chunk done. Since we were in such a new and beautiful place of the world, it was really hard to stay fully focused on the computer. So we drove home to the cabin to get our first full night's sleep. On day 2 we woke up well rested, and since Sniffelwith slept for longer I spent a good hour just looking at the landscape and taking a little walk around the place. As soon as Sniffelwith woke up we were off to the castle again. During the day we went for more walks around the place, got some good stuff to eat, had a drink and of course worked on a bunch on the game. So day 2 was fairly productive. Sniffelwith continued on with the game UI while I started working on more abilities. I rather quickly added the dash and the shield ability, as well as introduced the new characters, which really makes the game come together visually. To stick to the quick and dirty theme, I also started working on a farting ability. I thought it was just the right amount of silly, but still fitting to the game. And also, you know, farts equals funny, so everyone knows that. We ended up spending a good chunk of time getting familiar with the Coherence system. Even though it is very intuitive to work with, there are also some things you just need to get used to, such as the code baking. This is not something I'm used to for other systems, so working with version control systems such as GitHub with the baking quickly became a bit confusing for us and a reason for debugging on some occasions. But generally it worked really well. So once again we headed back and got a good night's sleep. Day 3 was just as good as day 2. I started off finishing off the farting ability, as well as adding a punch to the left mouse button. This gives the player more to do when the abilities are on cooldown and really increases the pace of the game a lot. After doing this I added a mudball ability as well to add some ranged attacks. So when using the mudball you shoot out a big slow moving projectile that knocks back anything in its path. We actually found out that you could punch the mudball to accelerate it. It's one of those surprise features that are always really fun. So Sniffelwith also added to the mudball so it would decrease in size as it traveled. He also made it so the map tiles would occasionally start shaking and then fall as a bit of the environmental challenge to always keep players on their toes. It is, however, only the big inner tiles that does this, which means that you could technically stay on the edge of the map, but at a greater risk of being knocked off by other players. Sniffle also got much further on the UI, and it now started looking like a real game coming together. Day 4 is technically our last day here, and other jammers also would have a full day 5, but unfortunately we had to head home earlier. This was pre-planned, so no surprise, but a full day means a lot in a game jam. So on this day we got very busy. We realized that even though we had something that looked and felt like a real game, some big chunks of the gameplay loop were still missing, and a lot of it is multiplayer stuff, which is always extra tricky for a game jam since there's a lot more debugging and playtesting involved. Most of the UI wasn't properly networked at this point either, as well as the whole dying, respawning and resetting the game wasn't actually added either. The damage element wasn't properly integrated either, so we got working on this. After getting the gameplay loop working, I also started working on a character selection screen. We wanted all characters to have 2 abilities, so we started mixing these up. I manually set up everything in the menu, and this is the furthest from a scalable setup, but we really just needed something to work. I also created a very basic matchmaking system, which fortunately was very easy using Coherence. It basically just checks if there are any open rooms with space for another player and joins that. If not, it will create a new room. So I very quickly set that up with a button and a loading icon, and boom, done. We now have a fully playable multiplayer game that was made in just 4 days. I'm extremely proud of what Sir Snifflewith and I were able to achieve in such a short amount of time. And it's also just really fun to get such a good life experience with a good friend of mine. During the early evening on day 4, they also fired the cannon, which was extremely loud, but it was a nice touch since we were in a medieval castle after all. And this is the end of us for the game jam, but not the complete end of the video. Of course, you can go to the link in the description and try out the game with a friend or some strangers perhaps. And also, what's the conclusion of the game jam? What happened? Did we win? Did we lose completely? Did we get 3rd place? Whatever. So the thing is, you had to present the game jam on the last day, but the thing is we weren't there, and only people who played in the game jam could vote, which means our game didn't really get any votes because it didn't get presented. So, I mean, even though it got, I think, 3 votes, we ended up even losing in the multiplayer category, even to games that weren't multiplayer. Just to give you an idea, the voting system works on the more votes, the heavier it also is favored. So even if, let's say, 3 people gave us the top score and everything, we would still probably lose across most parts to a game that just got decent scores, but with 30 votes. So that's okay. Of course, it's a bit of a shame. Could have been really fun seeing where we would have been score-wise. I was hoping we could do very well, but obviously, as we weren't able to actually present the game, we weren't able to actually gather any votes, and yeah. So we were basically just an invisible part in this game jam in terms of the score and the game result. But that being said, that's not really why we were there. A trip like this is something I can truly recommend. We met so many amazing people there, everyone was super nice, and it was very clear that even though it was a game jam, most people were just as much there for the social element, and I really hope to meet them all again one day. I even met people who have been using my tutorials for their own projects, which is very surreal to me. So thank you very much to anyone who made this trip such a great experience. And lastly, thanks to Coherence for sending me on this trip. Hiro, who represented Coherence, was just genuinely one of the nicest people I think I've ever met. And I really hope to have more to do with him for the future. Such a funny and very genuine guy. And thanks to you for watching. This is what makes this stuff possible to me. I truly do appreciate each and every one. And please do remember to like, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. And I just hope that you have a wonderful day.